The restaurant hall had been chosen for its chandeliers, for the way the light scattered in warm shards across polished glasses and white tablecloths. Everything here was meant to say, new beginning. The bride's family had insisted on the place, on the menu, on the guest list. Even the seating had been planned like a chessboard, with careful distance between those who might clash. And yet, no one had thought about words. No one ever does. The son stood when it was his turn to speak, straightening the borrowed jacket that fit him just a little too tightly at the shoulders. He cleared his throat, smiled at his wife, at her parents, at the crowd of faces turned toward him with expectation. His voice trembled at first, then steadied. He thanked the guests, the friends, the family. Laughter rippled where it was meant to. Glasses lifted and set down again. Then his gaze slid, almost reluctantly, to the far end of the table. His mother sat there quietly, as she had all evening. She hadn't argued when she was placed there. She never argued anymore. Her dress was dark blue, simple, ironed so carefully that the creases were sharp. Her hair was pulled back, showing a face lined not by age so much as by endurance. She held her hands folded, fingers rough, nails short and clean. He hesitated, and in that hesitation something old and bitter rose in him. Shame, perhaps. Fear of being associated with a past he had spent years trying to outrun. The words slipped out before he could stop them, sharp and careless. He called her a homeless ex-con, half joking, half defensive, as if mocking her first would shield him from anyone else doing it. The room froze. It was not the loud kind of silence, but the kind that spread slowly, like cold. Forks paused mid-air. Someone coughed and then stopped. The music from the speakers faltered as if unsure whether it was still welcome. At the bride's table, her mother stiffened, lips pressed thin. Her father stared into his glass. The relatives exchanged quick, startled looks, the kind that say this was not rehearsed. The son laughed awkwardly, realizing too late that the joke had no landing. His smile faltered. He looked at his mother again, expecting anger, tears, a scene, something he could react to. She did not react. She inhaled once, deeply, and then pushed her chair back. The scrape of the chair legs against the floor sounded louder than the microphone. Heads turned. She stood slowly, as if making sure her balance was steady, as if grounding herself in the moment. When she asked for the microphone, her voice was calm. That, more than anything, unsettled people. A waiter hesitated, glanced at the bride's parents, then handed it over. The microphone felt cool in her hand. She held it with both palms, the way one might hold something fragile. For a moment, she said nothing. She looked around the room, not accusingly, just attentively, as if she were memorizing faces. Then she began. She spoke softly, but the room leaned toward her. "I wasn't planning to say anything tonight," she said. "This isn't my celebration. It's theirs." She nodded toward the couple. The bride's eyes were wide, unsure, but not unkind. But words were said, and words have weight. She paused, choosing the next ones carefully. "Yes, I went to prison," she continued. "Not because I was proud or brave, and not because I want pity now. I went because at that time, there was a choice. One of us would fall. I chose to be the one who already knew how to get back up." A murmur stirred, then died. "I worked where people didn't ask questions. I slept where it was cold. I learned how invisible a person can become." She smiled faintly, not bitterly, just truthfully. "If that makes me what he called me, then so be it." Her son stared at her now, color draining from his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I didn't come here to defend myself," she said. "I came because my son is getting married. Because despite everything, I raised him to stand on his own feet. Maybe I didn't raise him to choose his words better. That's on me." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. "But I did raise him. I fed him when there was little. I taught him to read. I told him that his past did not have to be his future." She looked directly at him then, and there was no anger in her eyes. Only something deeper, something heavier. "I don't need respect from this room," she said. "I've lived without it before. I only need to know that the sacrifices meant something." The microphone hummed softly as she lowered it. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the bride stood. She crossed the small distance between tables and took the older woman's hand, squeezing it gently. It was a simple gesture, unplanned, instinctive. The bride's mother inhaled sharply, as if to object, then stopped herself. The father cleared his throat, stood, and nodded once, stiffly, toward the woman with the microphone. The son's chair tipped back as he rose too quickly. His eyes were wet now, unguarded. "Mom," he said, and the word cracked. He stepped toward her, awkward, unsure, then wrapped his arms around her shoulders. She stiffened for a second, surprised, and then returned the embrace, patting his back the way she had when he was small and scraped his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though the microphone was no longer near. "I was stupid." She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was quiet. "I know." Applause started somewhere near the back, hesitant at first, then spreading, filling the space that had been so tense moments before. It wasn't thunderous, but it was sincere. People exhaled. Glasses were raised again, not as high, not as showy. The music resumed, softer than before. The woman returned to her seat, smoothing her dress, her hands steady again. She was still at the end of the table, still not central to the picture-perfect scene. But something had shifted. People glanced at her with new eyes, not curiosity now, but recognition. The wedding went on. There were dances, photographs, more toasts. Laughter returned, though it carried an echo of what had been said. And in the corner of the hall, under the chandelier's warm light, a woman who had been many things in her life, convict, worker, survivor, mother, sat quietly and watched her son begin the life she had endured so much to give him. The applause faded gradually, like a wave pulling back from shore, leaving behind a strange, fragile calm. People returned to their seats, but they no longer sat the same way. Backs were straighter, movements more careful, as if the room itself had learned a lesson and was afraid to forget it too quickly. The woman sat again at the end of the table, placing the microphone aside as though it were an object borrowed from another life. Her hands rested in her lap. Only now did a slight tremor show in her fingers, the delayed echo of everything she had held inside while standing. She focused on her breathing, slow and even, the way she had learned long ago in places where losing control was dangerous. Across the hall, the son remained standing for a moment longer than necessary. He felt exposed, stripped of the easy confidence he had worn like a suit that evening. Conversations restarted around him, but they sounded distant, muffled, as if he were underwater. He looked at his wife. There was no accusation in her expression, only a quiet expectation. Not judgment. Something harder than that. He leaned down and whispered something to her. She nodded once, then squeezed his hand. At the bride's table, her parents exchanged a look that held years of certainty cracking at the edges. The mother adjusted her necklace, a nervous habit, and glanced again toward the woman at the far end. This time, she did not look away quickly. The father lifted his glass, hesitated, then stood. "I think," he said gruffly, raising his voice just enough to carry, "we should drink to truth. Even when it's uncomfortable." No one argued. Glasses lifted again, and this time the sound of them clinking was softer, more deliberate. The son moved. He walked the length of the table, ignoring the narrow space, the knees he brushed past, the startled looks. When he reached his mother, he crouched beside her chair, bringing himself down to her level like he had when he was a child asking forgiveness. "I forgot," he said quietly. "I forgot who paid for everything I have." She studied his face, really looked at him, as if checking whether this apology was meant for her or for the room. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. She reached out and adjusted his collar, a small, familiar gesture. "Just don't forget again," she said. The bride approached then, holding 2 glasses of juice. She handed one to the older woman with a shy smile. "I'm glad you spoke," she said. "I want our family to be honest." Family. The word settled gently, unexpectedly, like something fragile placed into open hands. Music swelled again, warmer now. Someone laughed too loudly, someone else joined in, and soon the sound spread naturally. The night reclaimed its rhythm, but it did not erase what had happened. It carried it forward, and at the edge of the celebration, a woman who had once been reduced to labels sat no longer invisible, her presence woven quietly, firmly, into the story of what this family would remember.